April 12, 1944. The muddy, war-torn roads of northern France. Private First Class Robert Jackson hunched over the steering wheel of his supply truck, confident that the well-established route to the forward operating base would take him safely through Allied territory. The morning sun cast deceptive warmth over terrain that would soon become a deadly gauntlet of German artillery and sniper fire. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how a segregated transportation unit's lowest-ranking driver challenged military hierarchy, defied conventional wisdom, and created a supply route so unorthodox that it would save hundreds of lives, and fundamentally change how one white commander viewed African-American soldiers during World War II. The 3989th Quartermaster Truck Company had been operational in the European theater for just over 7 months. Part of the Red Ball Express, the massive supply operation that kept Allied forces equipped as they pushed toward Germany, the company consisted entirely of African-American drivers commanded by white officers. Their mission was straightforward but critical: deliver ammunition, food, fuel, and medical supplies to combat units at the front lines. Captain Thomas Whitfield stood on the wooden crate that served as his makeshift podium, addressing the assembled drivers of the 3989th. The morning briefing was routine, but today's mission carried heightened urgency. The 116th Infantry Regiment had advanced faster than expected and established a position 18 miles northeast of St. Lo. But they were dangerously low on ammunition and medical supplies. Standard route through Carrington, then northeast along Highway D971, Captain Whitfield announced, tracing the line on his map. Intelligence reports indicate the route is secure, with Allied checkpoints every 3 miles. 26 trucks, full convoy departing at 0700 hours. At the back of the group, Private First Class. Robert Jackson shifted uncomfortably. At 24, he was younger than most of the drivers, but had already logged more miles in combat zones than any other driver in the company. Born and raised in rural Mississippi, he'd learned to drive on his uncle's delivery truck at age 12, navigating backroads and developing an intuitive understanding of terrain that no military training could provide. "Sir, permission to speak?" Jackson raised his hand, drawing surprised glances from the other drivers. Captain Whitfield squinted, trying to identify the voice from the back. "Make it quick, Private. That route takes us through the Forêt de Cérisy, sir. The trees there are perfect cover for German artillery spotters. We lost 2 trucks there last week." A murmur rippled through the assembled men. Captain Whitfield's jaw tightened. "Intelligence has cleared the route, Private Jackson. The 29th cleared those woods 3 days ago." "With respect, sir," Jackson persisted, "Germans have been filtering back in at night. Local farmers told me they've seen movement in the eastern section." This was the dynamic that defined the 3989th. African-American drivers who did the dangerous work of moving supplies through combat zones were rarely consulted on tactical matters, despite often having the best ground-level intelligence gathered from locals and personal observation. "And you speak French now, Jackson?" Lieutenant Peterson sneered from beside the captain. "No, sir," Jackson replied evenly, "but I understand when a farmer makes the sign of a gun and points to the woods." A few chuckles broke the tension, quickly silenced by the captain's glare. "I have an alternative route, sir," Jackson added, stepping forward. "It's longer by about 12 miles. But we don't have fuel for additional 12 miles per truck, Private," Captain Whitfield cut him off. "And we certainly don't have time for detours. The 116th needs these supplies by nightfall." Jackson nodded and stepped back, but his expression remained troubled. This wasn't the first time his concerns had been dismissed, and like most of the black drivers in the unit, he'd learned to follow orders even when they contradicted what he knew from experience. The briefing continued with specific assignments. Jackson would be driving Truck 17 in the convoy, carrying critical medical supplies and plasma. As the men dispersed to their vehicles, Jackson found himself joined by Staff Sergeant Earl Wilson, the highest-ranking black soldier in the company. "You really think that route is compromised?" Wilson asked quietly. Jackson nodded. "Yes, Sergeant, and I've been thinking about another way around." Wilson glanced toward where Captain Whitfield was conferring with the other white officers. "Your alternative route? You said it's 12 miles longer?" "Yes, but it avoids any forested areas where they could set up observation." It follows the river for a stretch, then cuts through 3 small villages where the resistance is strong. They've been keeping those areas clear. Wilson considered this. At 36, he had served in the army for nearly 15 years, navigating the complex dynamics of being a black non-commissioned officer in a segregated military. You sound pretty sure of yourself, Jackson. I've been making notes, Sergeant, talking to locals when I can, learning which routes stay clear and which ones get re-infiltrated. Jackson pulled a worn notebook from his pocket. Been mapping it all here. Wilson raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. That's good initiative, Jackson. But the captain's orders stand. I know, Sergeant, Jackson replied, tucking the notebook away. Just thought someone should know there's another way. As the convoy prepared to depart, the grim business of war continued around them. Ambulances arrived from the front, bringing wounded to the field hospital. Among them was Lieutenant Colonel James Hendricks of the 116th Infantry, the very unit awaiting their supplies. Colonel Hendricks had been wounded by sniper fire while inspecting forward positions. As medics transferred him from the ambulance, he caught sight of the supply convoy preparing to move out. "Those supplies heading to my men?" he called out to Captain Whitfield, who was supervising the convoy's preparation. "Yes, sir," Whitfield replied, approaching the stretcher. "Departing within the hour." Colonel Hendricks grimaced, partly from pain and partly from concern. "What route are you taking?" "Through Carentan and up D971, sir." The wounded officer's expression darkened. "Whitfield, we just pulled back from a firefight near the eastern edge of Cerisy Forest. Germans have infiltrated back in with at least 2 artillery units. We lost 17 men this morning." Captain Whitfield's face paled. "But intelligence reported—" "Intelligence is 12 hours old by the time it reaches you," Hendricks cut him off. "The situation is fluid. Find another route." As medics carried Colonel Hendricks away, Captain Whitfield stood frozen, the implications sinking in. The convoy's departure time was minutes away, and he had no alternative route planned. The supplies had to reach the 116th by nightfall. Men would die otherwise. He strode back to the assembly area, where drivers were already in their vehicles. "Convoy hold," he shouted. "New information from the front." The drivers watched as Captain Whitfield unfolded his map on the hood of the lead truck, studying it intently. He was looking for an alternate route, but the terrain offered few options. Most secondary roads were too narrow for the heavy trucks or would add hours to the journey. "Sir," Staff Sergeant Wilson approached cautiously. "Private Jackson has a suggested alternate route." Captain Whitfield looked up sharply. "The same one he mentioned earlier, 12 miles longer?" "Yes, sir. But he believes it will be safer and ultimately faster if the primary route is under fire." The captain hesitated, years of military hierarchy and racial prejudice battling against tactical necessity. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Bring him up here." Jackson approached, standing at attention. "Sir, this alternate route of yours. Show me." Whitfield gestured to the map. Jackson leaned over the map, tracing a line with his finger. "Instead of going through Carentan, we head south first to this small crossing at La Mauve. The bridge there is small but intact. I used it on a solo run last week. Then we follow this farm road east, parallel to the river. It's good solid ground, even with recent rain." Captain Whitfield frowned. "That takes you within a mile of known German positions near Saint-Jean-de-Day." "Yes, sir, but there's a ridge that blocks line of sight. The Germans have observation posts facing north, watching the main road. This approach from the southwest stays in their blind spot." "And how do you know this, Private?" Jackson hesitated. "I've been collecting information, sir. From locals, other drivers, wounded coming back from the front. Been keeping a log of safe passages." For the first time, Captain Whitfield looked at Jackson, really looked at him, seeing not just another black driver, but a soldier with valuable expertise. The moment stretched between them, laden with the weight of institutional prejudice and the immediate demands of war. "How confident are you in this route, Jackson?" "Very confident, sir. But I should lead the convoy. There are 3 turns that are easy to miss, especially the one by the old mill." Captain Whitfield nodded slowly. "Wilson, have Jackson transfer his medical supplies to another truck. He'll take point in the jeep with me." He turned back to Jackson. I'm trusting your judgment, Private. If this goes wrong, it won't, sir, Jackson replied with quiet certainty. 20 minutes later, the convoy was reorganized. Jackson sat in the passenger seat of the lead jeep, his notebook open on his lap. Captain Whitfield drove, still uncomfortable with the arrangement, but seeing no better option. "Take the next right, sir," Jackson directed as they approached a narrow country lane that appeared barely wide enough for the trucks. "You're sure about this?" Whitfield questioned, even as he made the turn. "Yes, sir. It widens after the first quarter mile. Local farmers use it to move harvesting equipment." True to Jackson's word, the lane soon broadened, its packed dirt surface firm enough for the heavy vehicles. Behind them, the convoy of 26 trucks followed in single file, maintaining careful distance to minimize dust that might attract enemy attention. The first hour passed without incident. They crossed the small bridge at La Maufe, then followed the meandering path that kept them close to the Vire River, but shielded from observation by a series of low hills. Jackson continued to provide directions, occasionally consulting his notebook. "How did you compile all this information?" Whitfield asked during a relatively straight stretch. "Started as a personal safety measure, sir," Jackson replied. "After we lost those trucks at St. Lo, I realized official routes weren't always safest. So I began asking questions, watching which paths the locals used. They know which areas Germans infiltrate at night." Whitfield nodded thoughtfully. "Why didn't you bring this to command sooner?" Jackson gave him a measured look. "With respect, sir, I did. 3 times. Was told to stick to driving and leave the planning to officers." The uncomfortable truth hung between them. Jackson had been right about the forest, and the regular channels had failed to utilize his knowledge that could save lives. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of artillery fire, coming from the direction of their original route. Captain Whitfield glanced at Jackson, who kept his eyes forward, offering no comment on the vindication that sound represented. As they approached the small village of Le Désert, Jackson suddenly held up his hand. "Stop here, sir." Whitfield braked, signaling the convoy behind them to halt. "Problem?" "Need to check something." Jackson climbed out, walking to the edge of a field where an elderly Frenchman was working with a hoe. A brief conversation ensued, with much pointing and gesturing, before Jackson returned. "We need to detour around the village," he explained. "2 German scout vehicles passed through an hour ago, heading east. Probably just passing through, but better to avoid them." "You told me this route was safe," Whitfield said accusingly. "I said it was safer, sir," Jackson corrected respectfully. "No route is completely safe. That's why I check with locals when possible. There's a farm path that skirts the south edge of the village." Whitfield weighed their options, then nodded. "Lead on." The detour added another 40 minutes to their journey, taking them through a series of muddy farm tracks that tested the truck's traction. 2 vehicles briefly became stuck, requiring teams of men to push them free. Through it all, Jackson remained composed, directing the convoy with a quiet confidence that gradually earned Whitfield's respect. By mid-afternoon, they had rejoined their planned route east of Le Désert. The convoy was now moving through increasingly open terrain, where concealment became more difficult. Jackson instructed the drivers to maintain maximum spacing and reduce speed to minimize dust clouds. "Next stretch is the most exposed part," Jackson informed Whitfield. "About 3 miles of open ground before we reach that line of trees. Once we're there, we'll be 8 miles from the 116th's position." As they proceeded across the open ground, the distant rumble of artillery continued to the north, along the route they would have taken. Whitfield's expression was grim as he considered what might have happened to his convoy in that sector. Halfway across the exposed stretch, Jackson suddenly stiffened. "Sir, aircraft, 3 o'clock, low." Whitfield spotted them immediately, 2 German Focke-Wulf 190s, flying a patrol pattern about 2 miles to the east. The aircraft hadn't spotted them yet, but with 26 vehicles in open terrain, detection seemed inevitable. "Options, Jackson?" Whitfield asked tersely. Jackson scanned the landscape. "There's a dry creek bed about 400 yards ahead. It's not deep, but it might provide enough cover if they come this way. And if the trucks can't make it down the embankment, then we scatter and pray, sir." Whitfield nodded grimly, then grabbed the radio. "All vehicles turn northwest at my signal. Proceed to creek bed at maximum possible speed. Prepare for aircraft. He waited until the trailing trucks received the message, then gave the signal. The convoy veered off their route, 26 heavy vehicles bouncing across the uneven ground toward the shallow depression Jackson had identified. The lead vehicles reached the creek bed just as the German aircraft altered course, apparently having spotted the dust clouds. Jackson directed the trucks to position themselves under the slight overhang of the eastern bank, providing minimal concealment from aerial observation. "Shut down engines," Whitfield ordered via radio. "All personnel take cover." The convoy fell silent as the German fighters approached. Men pressed themselves against the earth, some praying quietly, others clutching weapons they knew would be useless against aircraft. The Focke-Wulfs made a single pass overhead, banking sharply to come around for a second look. Jackson and Whitfield lay motionless beside the jeep, barely breathing as the aircraft roared past less than 300 feet above them. "They're looking for targets of opportunity," Jackson whispered. "If we don't move, there's a chance they'll continue on patrol without engaging." His assessment proved correct. After a third pass, the German aircraft resumed their original course, apparently deciding the vehicles weren't worth the ammunition or the risk of Allied fighter response. Once the aircraft disappeared from view, the convoy cautiously resumed its journey. The delay had cost them valuable time, but they were still on track to reach the 116th before nightfall. "That creek bed isn't on the map," Whitfield observed as they drove. "How did you know it was there?" "Noticed it 3 weeks ago when I was driving wounded back from the front," Jackson explained. "Made a note of it as a potential shelter. There's a lot of features like that, useful in a pinch but too small for official maps." Whitfield nodded thoughtfully. "Your attention to detail is impressive, Private." "Thank you, sir," Jackson replied, then pointed ahead. "We'll turn north at that stone farmhouse. Should be the last exposed stretch before we reach the wooded area." As they made the turn, the distant sound of small arms fire became audible. They were approaching the front. Jackson directed them onto a narrow track that wound through a stand of trees, providing welcome concealment after the open terrain. "We're about 5 miles from the 116th position now," he informed Whitfield. "This last stretch will be the trickiest. There's a German patrol that regularly moves through this area in late afternoon." "And how do we avoid them?" Whitfield asked. Jackson pointed to his right. "There's a sunken road that runs parallel to this one, about half a mile that way. It's rough going, probably add another 30 minutes to the trip, but it keeps us out of their usual patrol route." Whitfield considered this, weighing time against safety. "The 116th needs these supplies urgently." "Yes, sir," Jackson agreed. "But they need them delivered, not destroyed en route." After a moment, Whitfield nodded. "Take us to the sunken road." The detour proved even more difficult than Jackson had suggested. The sunken road, worn down by centuries of use, was barely wide enough for the trucks and riddled with rocks that threatened to puncture tires or damage axles. The convoy's pace slowed to a crawl as drivers navigated the treacherous passage. In the lead jeep, Jackson maintained a vigilant watch, occasionally consulting his notebook to confirm landmarks. "About 1 more mile on this road, sir. Then we'll turn northeast for the final approach to the 116th. As they rounded a bend, Jackson suddenly signaled for a stop. Ahead of them, partially hidden by brush, lay the burned-out hulk of an American supply truck, one of their own company. "Reynolds and Morris," Jackson said quietly, recognizing the vehicle. "They went missing 3 days ago on a special delivery run." Whitfield ordered the convoy to halt while they investigated. There were no bodies in or around the truck, which had been hit by what appeared to be a shaped charge, precision work by German infantry rather than random artillery. "Ambush," Whitfield concluded grimly. "Probably the same patrol you mentioned." Jackson nodded, examining the surrounding terrain. "Looks like they hit from that rise." He pointed to a small hill about 200 yards away. "Perfect position to target vehicles on this road." "So your detour brought us right into their kill zone," Whitfield said, anger edging his voice. "No, sir," Jackson replied calmly. "This is exactly why I wanted to check this road first. Reynolds was using the main route on the map. This proves the Germans are watching it." He pointed to where the sunken road continued ahead. "We need to leave the road here. Cut through that orchard to the northeast." Whitfield studied the orchard Jackson indicated, a dense stand of apple trees that would provide good concealment but difficult passage for the large trucks. "You're sure about this?" "As sure as I can be, sir. The alternative is continuing on a road we now know is watched." With the evidence of the destroyed truck before him, Whitfield couldn't argue. "Get back to the convoy. Direct each driver personally on the route through the orchard." For the next hour, Jackson guided the 26 vehicles through the overgrown orchard, sometimes having drivers back up and try different approaches when passages proved too narrow. The process was painstaking, but by dusk, the entire convoy had successfully navigated the obstacle. As they emerged from the orchard, they found themselves on a ridge overlooking a shallow valley. Below, about a mile distant, lay the forward position of the 116th Infantry, their destination. "We made it," Whitfield said, relief evident in his voice. "But we still need to get down there without drawing fire." Jackson pointed to a narrow track that wound down the ridge. "That path leads directly to their rear supply area. It's how their wounded are evacuated. Germans have the front and flanks under observation, but this approach from the rear is in their blind spot." "How could you possibly know that?" Whitfield asked, genuinely curious now rather than suspicious. "Drove an empty truck up here last week to pick up wounded. Made a point to talk to their forward observers about safe approaches." Jackson shrugged slightly. "Just seemed like useful information to have." The final descent to the 116th's position was made in deepening twilight, which provided additional concealment from potential observers. As the lead jeep approached the perimeter, they were met by a patrol of weary infantrymen who regarded the convoy with astonishment. "Where the hell did you come from?" asked a lieutenant, approaching their jeep. "We were told supply delivery was impossible until the route was cleared." "We found an alternate route, Lieutenant," Whitfield replied, then gestured to Jackson. "Private Jackson's route, to be precise." The lieutenant looked between them, curiosity evident on his face, but the pressing need for supplies overshadowed all other concerns. "Well, however you got here, we're damn glad to see you. We're down to our last crates of ammunition and the medics are operating without plasma." As the convoy was directed to the supply depot for unloading, the lieutenant pulled Captain Whitfield aside. "Colonel Hendricks is our CO, but he was wounded this morning. Major Ellis is in command until the colonel returns. He'll want to debrief you on how you got through." Whitfield nodded. "We'll report to him immediately, and I'll need Jackson with me. He's the one who plotted our route." If the lieutenant was surprised by a captain insisting on bringing a private driver to a debriefing with a major, he didn't show it. "This way, sir." Major Ellis was in the command tent, leaning over maps with his intelligence officer, when Whitfield and Jackson were shown in. The major looked up, exhaustion evident on his face, but his expression brightened at the news of the supply convoy's arrival. "Captain Whitfield, your timing is impeccable. We were just discussing how long we could hold this position without resupply." He gestured to the maps. "Intelligence said the main supply route was cut off by German artillery. How did you get through?" "We didn't use the main route, sir," Whitfield replied. "Private Jackson here identified an alternate approach that kept us out of enemy observation." Major Ellis glanced at Jackson, noting his rank and his race, then looked back to Whitfield with a questioning expression. "Private Jackson has been maintaining detailed records of safe passage routes based on his own observations and information gathered from locals," Whitfield explained. "His intelligence proved more accurate than our official reports." Ellis turned his full attention to Jackson. "Is that right, Private? You found a safe route when our S2 couldn't?" "Not exactly, sir," Jackson replied carefully. "Intelligence is working with broader information. I've just been focused on specific routes and local conditions. Different perspective, that's all." Ellis nodded thoughtfully. "Well, your different perspective just saved this position. We couldn't have held another 24 hours without those supplies." He turned to his intelligence officer. "Lieutenant Parker, debrief Private Jackson on his route. I want every detail added to our maps." For the next hour, Jackson walked the intelligence team through the route they had taken, explaining each decision point and the reasoning behind his choices. He shared information from his notebook, which contained observations not just about roads and terrain, but about German patrol patterns, local resistance activities, and civilian movements that indicated danger areas. When the debriefing concluded, Major Ellis addressed both Whitfield and Jackson. "Excellent work, gentlemen. Captain, I'll be reporting this to Colonel Hendricks when I speak with him tomorrow. I'm sure he'll want to commend your initiative." He turned to Jackson. "And you, Private, that's some exceptional fieldcraft, the kind of ground-level intelligence that saves lives." As they left the command tent, Captain Whitfield was uncharacteristically quiet. The two men walked through the busy encampment, where their convoy was being unloaded amid expressions of gratitude from the infantry soldiers. "You'll be heading back tomorrow," Whitfield finally said. "Empty trucks, so you can move faster. Take the same route?" "With slight modifications, sir," Jackson replied. "German patterns will have shifted overnight. We should check with local contacts near Le Désert before committing to that passage." Whitfield nodded, then stopped walking, turning to face Jackson directly. "I owe you an apology, Private." Jackson remained silent, waiting. "I dismissed your input this morning. If I had listened, we'd have been on the road sooner with less risk. That was poor leadership on my part." "You made the right call when it mattered, sir," Jackson offered. "No, I made the right call when I had no other options," Whitfield corrected him. "That's not the same thing." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "The Army has its ways, Jackson. Not all of them good. Men like you get overlooked because of—" He gestured vaguely. "The color of my skin, sir," Jackson supplied quietly. Whitfield nodded uncomfortably. "I can't change the whole system, but I can change how things work in the 3989th. He straightened his shoulders. "When we get back, I'm recommending you for promotion to sergeant and creating a new role, Route Intelligence Specialist. You'll work directly with our operations team on convoy planning." Jackson blinked, momentarily speechless. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me," Whitfield replied gruffly. "It's what should have happened months ago if I'd been paying proper attention." He glanced around at the 116th's position, where men were already distributing the newly arrived supplies. "Your route saved lives today, Jackson, both theirs and ours." The next morning, as the convoy prepared for its return journey, word spread through the 116th Infantry about the ridiculous route that had brought them their desperately needed supplies. The phrase originated with a skeptical lieutenant who, upon hearing Jackson's description of the winding path they'd taken, declared it the most ridiculous route I've ever heard of, and thank God for it. As Jackson climbed into the lead jeep beside Captain Whitfield, he was approached by several infantrymen who wanted to shake his hand. The significance of the moment, white combat soldiers openly acknowledging and thanking a black driver, wasn't lost on anyone present. The return journey proved less eventful than the outbound trip. Jackson's route, with minor adjustments based on fresh intelligence from the 116th's reconnaissance teams, kept them well clear of German observation posts and patrols. They reached their base by mid-afternoon, having suffered no casualties or vehicle losses. Word of their successful mission spread quickly through the supply corps. Colonel Hendricks, though still recovering from his wounds, personally called Captain Whitfield to commend the 3989th's performance. More significantly, he requested a detailed report on Jackson's route planning methodology for distribution to other transport units. 3 days later, Private First Class Robert Jackson was promoted to sergeant and officially assigned to the newly created position of Route Intelligence Specialist for the 3989th. The promotion came with authorization to recruit 2 assistants to expand his intelligence-gathering efforts. In the weeks that followed, Jackson developed a comprehensive system for mapping safe routes throughout the sector. His team of 3, all black drivers who had previously shown an aptitude for local intelligence, built relationships with French civilians, resistance fighters, and forward reconnaissance units to create a constantly updated picture of German movements and safe passages. Captain Whitfield, for his part, became an unexpected advocate for utilizing the expertise of his black drivers. In planning meetings with other white officers, he openly credited Jackson's methods with reducing the 3989th's casualty rate by over 60%. By August 1944, as Allied forces broke out from Normandy and began the race across France, the 3989th Quartermaster Truck Company had the highest successful delivery rate and lowest casualty figures of any transport unit in the sector. Their methods were being studied and adapted by other units, both black and white. On August 15th, Jackson's team was tasked with plotting a route to deliver critical fuel supplies to armored units that had advanced faster than their supply lines could keep up. The mission was considered high risk, as the rapidly changing front lines meant intelligence could be outdated by the time they departed. "I don't like this timeline," Captain Whitfield said during the mission briefing. "Jackson's team needs at least 6 hours to verify route safety, and we're being asked to roll out in 3. Colonel Davis, the quartermaster commander who had flown in to oversee the critical mission, frowned. "Captain, those tanks will grind to a halt without this fuel. The entire advance could stall. We don't have 6 hours." "Sir, with respect," Jackson interjected, "an immobilized fuel convoy doesn't help anyone. 3 hours gives us time for only the most basic route planning." Colonel Davis studied Jackson for a moment. Like many higher-ranking officers encountering the 3989th's operations for the first time, he seemed unsure how to process a black sergeant speaking up in a tactical briefing. Captain Whitfield stepped in smoothly. "Colonel, Sergeant Jackson's team has reduced our combat losses by over 60% using their intelligence methods. I strongly recommend we give them the time they need to do this properly." The colonel glanced between Whitfield and Jackson, then at the clock on the wall. Finally, he nodded. "You have 5 hours, Sergeant. Not 6, not 4. 5. Make them count." "Yes, sir," Jackson replied, already mentally adjusting his team's priorities. For the next 5 hours, Jackson's intelligence team worked frantically, collating reports from multiple sources to identify a safe route to the advanced armored units. They sent 2 jeeps out to check critical junctions and interview locals about recent German movements. By the time the convoy was ready to depart, they had plotted a route that avoided all known German positions while still delivering the fuel within the required time frame. Captain Whitfield, who would be accompanying the convoy personally due to the mission's importance, reviewed the final route with Jackson. "You're sure about this section here?" he asked, pointing to a stretch that passed within 2 miles of a reported German anti-tank unit. "As sure as possible given the constraints, sir," Jackson replied. "That German unit is oriented north, watching the main road. Our approach from the southwest should keep us out of their line of sight. Plus, the terrain there provides good concealment." Whitfield nodded, having learned to trust Jackson's assessments. "Good work, Sergeant. Let's move out." The fuel convoy, 15 trucks carrying over 9,000 gallons of gasoline, departed at dusk, taking advantage of fading light for the most exposed portions of the journey. Jackson rode in the lead jeep with Captain Whitfield, constantly scanning the terrain and checking it against his notes. They were halfway to their objective when they received a radio message that changed everything. The armored units had engaged a German counterattack and been pushed back nearly 8 miles. The rendezvous point was now behind German lines. Whitfield immediately halted the convoy in a concealed position while he and Jackson assessed the new situation. "Options?" he asked grimly. Jackson studied the map, comparing it with his intelligence notes. "The Germans have advanced along this axis," he said, tracing a line with his finger. "But their push is narrow, focused on the main road. There's likely a gap here, along this stream bed." "That's well within range of their artillery," Whitfield pointed out. "Yes, sir. But they'll have moved most of their artillery forward to support the advance. This flanking approach could get us behind their spearhead to where our tanks have regrouped." It was a dangerous proposition, essentially driving the fuel convoy around the edge of an active battlefield to reach friendly forces that had been pushed back. If Jackson's assessment of the German deployment was wrong, they'd be driving 15 trucks of highly flammable fuel directly into enemy fire. "You're suggesting we try to thread the needle between their advance units and their flanking protection," Whitfield summarized. "Yes, sir, it's high risk, but the tanks need this fuel to counterattack. Without it, they'll be forced to withdraw even further." Whitfield considered their options, knowing that the decision he made would impact not just the convoy, but potentially the larger battle. "How confident are you in this gap existing, Jackson?" "Based on observation of German tactics in this sector over the past 2 months, very confident, sir. They commit fully to their advances, often leaving their flanks exposed. Our reconnaissance elements reported similar patterns yesterday." After a moment of thought, Whitfield nodded decisively. "We'll proceed with your plan, but at the first sign that the gap is closed, we turn back. I won't lose this convoy on a gamble." Understood, sir. The convoy resumed its journey, now following a hastily planned route that would take them through what Jackson believed to be a gap in the German lines. They traveled with headlights off, drivers relying on moonlight and the vehicle ahead to navigate the difficult terrain. As they approached the theoretical gap, the sounds of battle became clearly audible, artillery fire to the north and the distinctive clatter of tank-mounted machine guns to the northeast. They were skirting the edge of a major engagement. "Stop here," Jackson said suddenly as they crested a small rise. Ahead of them, perhaps half a mile distant, dark shapes moved across the landscape, vehicles of some kind traveling without lights. Whitfield immediately signaled the convoy to halt and shut down engines. He and Jackson moved forward on foot to a position where they could observe the movement ahead. "German supply trucks," Jackson whispered after studying the distant vehicles through binoculars, "moving east to support their advance." "How many?" "I count 8, moving in column along that farm track. No apparent security detail." Whitfield considered their options. "If that's their supply line, then your gap exists just south of it, but crossing their supply route is risky. If we're spotted, they'll call in everything they have." Jackson nodded, then pointed to a densely wooded area to their south. "If we can get the convoy into those woods, we can parallel their supply line until we're past their advance, then cut north to reach our tanks." "Those woods look dense. Can the trucks make it through?" "It'll be tight, but yes, we've navigated worse." Whitfield made his decision. "Get back to the convoy. We'll proceed to the woods, then reassess." The 15 fuel trucks, guided by Jackson and the intelligence team, slowly made their way into the wooded area. Once concealed beneath the canopy, they followed a meandering path roughly parallel to the German supply route they'd observed. Progress was painfully slow. Drivers had to navigate between trees with only inches to spare in some places. Several times, crews had to cut branches or move fallen logs to allow passage. Throughout, the sounds of battle continued to their north, occasionally punctuated by the whistle and crash of artillery shells. After nearly 2 hours of careful movement through the woods, they reached a small clearing where Jackson called for a halt. "We should be past the German advance now," he told Whitfield, checking his map against landmarks. "From here, we head due north for approximately 3 miles. That should bring us to the new American lines." "And if the Germans have pushed further west while we've been crawling through these woods?" Whitfield asked. "Then we'll encounter their rear elements rather than their main force," Jackson replied. "Better odds either way." With no better options, Whitfield ordered the convoy to proceed north. They emerged from the woods onto open farmland, now traveling as quickly as conditions allowed. Every man was tense, watching for any sign of German forces. They had covered about 2 miles when a flare suddenly illuminated the night sky ahead of them. The convoy immediately halted as Jackson and Whitfield tried to determine the flare's origin and meaning. "American recognition signal," Jackson said, after observing a second flare. "That pattern, red then green, it's today's recognition code." "Unless the Germans captured the codes," Whitfield countered, still cautious. "Only one way to find out, sir." They proceeded slowly toward where the flares had originated. After another half mile, they were challenged by a voice calling out in English, "Flash!" "Thunder!" Whitfield responded with the correct countersign. Moments later, they were greeted by an American reconnaissance unit that had been sent to locate the fuel convoy after radio contact was lost. The sergeant in charge could hardly believe what he was seeing. "You actually got through?" he asked incredulously. "Command said you'd most likely turned back when the Germans advanced. How the hell did you find a way through their lines?" Whitfield glanced at Jackson. "We had good intelligence." The reconnaissance unit escorted them to where the armored units had established a defensive position. Their arrival with the desperately needed fuel was greeted with astonishment and relief. The tank commanders had been preparing to abandon several vehicles due to low fuel, which would have meant a full retreat from the sector. "Your timing is perfect," the tank battalion commander told them. "We're launching a counterattack at dawn. Without this fuel, we'd have been pulling back instead." As the fuel was being distributed to the tanks, the battalion commander pulled Captain Whitfield aside. "How did you manage to get through? Our intelligence showed the Germans had closed all approaches." "We found a gap in their lines," Whitfield explained. then gestured to where Jackson was helping coordinate the refueling. Sergeant Jackson's intelligence team identified it. They've developed quite a system for route planning and threat assessment. The commander looked at Jackson with newfound interest. That right? Well, I'll make sure higher-ups hear about this. Your outfit may have just saved this entire operation. The dawn counterattack proceeded as planned, with the newly refueled tanks pushing the German forces back to their starting positions and beyond. The 3989th convoy, having completed their delivery, began the journey back to their base along a route now secured by advancing American forces. In the lead jeep, Captain Whitfield and Sergeant Jackson drove in companionable silence for a time, both exhausted from the night's tension. "That route through the woods," Whitfield finally said. "That was a gamble, even for you." Jackson nodded. "Yes, sir, but a calculated one." "Based on what?" "We had no intelligence about the German dispositions after they advanced." "Pattern recognition, sir," Jackson explained. "In the past 2 months, I've observed 17 German advances in this sector. They commit everything to the spearhead and leave minimal forces on the flanks. It's a consistent weakness in their tactical approach." Whitfield shook his head, impressed. "You should have been an intelligence officer, Jackson." A faint smile crossed Jackson's face. "In another life, perhaps." The unspoken reality hung between them. That in 1944, the U.S. Army didn't make black men intelligence officers, regardless of their aptitude or accomplishments. The 3989th's experiment with Jackson's intelligence team was an anomaly, born of necessity and Captain Whitfield's willingness to challenge conventional thinking. "Things are changing, Sergeant," Whitfield said, as if reading his thoughts. "Slowly, but they are. Men like you are proving what's possible every day." "I appreciate that, sir, but I'm just doing my job, getting supplies where they need to go." "No," Whitfield corrected him. "You're doing a lot more than that. You're saving lives and changing minds, including mine." When they returned to base, they found Colonel Davis waiting for them. The quartermaster commander had received reports of the convoy's successful delivery and its impact on the battle. "Remarkable work, Captain," he said, shaking Whitfield's hand. "Headquarters is calling it the turning point of the engagement. The German advance had our forces on the back foot until those tanks got refueled and counterattacked." "Thank you, sir," Whitfield replied. "But the credit belongs to Sergeant Jackson and his team. Their intelligence assessment made the mission possible." Colonel Davis turned to Jackson, studying him with new interest. "So, you're the route specialist I've been hearing about. Your reputation is spreading, Sergeant." "Just doing my duty, sir," Jackson responded. "Well, your duty has caught the attention of some important people. General Bradley's staff has requested a full report on your intelligence methods. They're looking at implementing similar systems for other transport units." The news was unexpected. General Omar Bradley commanded the entire 12th Army Group, hundreds of thousands of men. That his staff had taken notice of a small innovation from a black transport unit was remarkable. "Sergeant Jackson would be happy to prepare that report, sir," Whitfield said. "Good. And there's more." Colonel Davis pulled a document from his briefcase. "Effective immediately, the 3989th is being designated as a training unit for route intelligence. You'll continue your normal supply operations, but you'll also train personnel from other companies in your methods." Both Whitfield and Jackson were momentarily speechless. It was unprecedented recognition for their work. "There's one condition," Davis continued. "Headquarters wants the training team integrated, both white and colored personnel working together as instructors." "That's going to raise some eyebrows, gentlemen." "We can handle raised eyebrows, sir," Whitfield replied confidently. "I expect you can," Davis agreed. "But be prepared for resistance both from white officers who don't want to take instruction from colored sergeants and from some of your own men who might be uncomfortable with the arrangement." Jackson spoke up. "With respect, sir, the men of the 3989th care most about getting home alive. If our methods help with that, they'll support the program regardless of who's doing the teaching." Davis nodded thoughtfully. "Let's hope that practical attitude spreads." He handed the official orders to Captain Whitfield. "You have 1 week to establish the training program. I suggest you select your personnel carefully." After the colonel departed, Whitfield turned to Jackson. "Well, Sergeant, it seems your ridiculous route has led to something significant. Jackson allowed himself a small smile. "Appears so, sir." "I want you to lead the training program," Whitfield continued. "Select 2 men from your team to assist you. I'll assign Lieutenant Peterson and Sergeant Willis from operations to work with you." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Lieutenant Peterson, sir, he's been skeptical of our methods." "Precisely why he needs to be involved," Whitfield replied. "He needs to see the value firsthand. And as my executive officer, his support will be crucial to making this work." Over the following weeks, the 3989th training program took shape. Initially met with skepticism from many white officers and NCOs sent to learn their methods, the program gradually earned respect through demonstrated results. Units that adopted Jackson's route intelligence system reported significant decreases in ambushes and convoy losses. Lieutenant Peterson, to everyone's surprise, became one of the program's strongest advocates after participating in a high-risk mission where Jackson's intelligence prevented them from driving into a German artillery trap. The experience transformed him from skeptic to believer. By late September 1944, as Allied forces pressed toward Germany, the 3989th's influence had spread throughout the supply services. Transport units, both black and white, were implementing variations of their intelligence system, saving countless lives and improving the flow of supplies to frontline units. For Sergeant Robert Jackson, the recognition brought both pride and a sense of vindication. The knowledge and observational skills he'd developed through necessity were now being acknowledged as valuable contributions to the war effort. Yet he remained humble, focused on the practical aspects of his work, rather than its wider significance. "You've started something important here, Jackson," Captain Whitfield told him one evening, as they reviewed reports from units that had adopted their methods. "Something that will outlast this war." "Just trying to get the job done, sir," Jackson replied with his characteristic modesty, "and keep our men alive while we do it." "It's more than that, and you know it," Whitfield insisted. "You've shown what's possible when men are judged by their abilities rather than their color. That matters, especially after this war ends." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "I hope so, sir. I surely hope so." In November 1944, General Bradley visited their sector to observe operations. During the tour, he specifically requested a briefing on the 3989th's intelligence methods. Sergeant Jackson, still uncomfortable in the presence of such high-ranking officers, nevertheless delivered a concise explanation of their system. "Impressive work, Sergeant," the general commented afterward. "Your approach makes perfect sense, yet nobody implemented it until now. Why do you think that is?" Jackson considered his response carefully. "War creates urgency, sir. Urgency sometimes helps us see past our usual limitations and recognize value wherever it exists." The general studied him thoughtfully. "Well put. I hope we can maintain that clarity of vision after the fighting stops." He turned to Captain Whitfield. "You've built something valuable here, Captain. Make sure it's properly documented for the historical record." Following the general's visit, the 3989th's prominence continued to grow. Their training program expanded, and Jackson was promoted again to staff sergeant. More significantly, their intelligence methods were formalized into a training manual distributed throughout the European theater. In December 1944, when the Germans launched the surprise Ardennes offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, transport units using the 3989th's intelligence methods were able to adapt quickly to rapidly changing conditions. Several convoys avoided capture by identifying alternative routes when main roads were cut by advancing German forces. By January 1945, as Allied forces regained the initiative, the value of the 3989th's approach was undeniable. Their methods had saved hundreds of vehicles and thousands of tons of supplies from capture or destruction, directly contributing to the Allied advance toward Germany. For Captain Thomas Whitfield, the experience had been transformative. The officer who had initially dismissed Private Jackson's concerns about route safety had become a staunch advocate for recognizing talent regardless of race. His reports to higher headquarters consistently emphasized the contributions of the black personnel under his command, challenging the prevailing institutional prejudices. For Staff Sergeant Robert Jackson, the journey from overlooked driver to respected intelligence specialist represented both personal vindication and a step toward greater recognition for black servicemen. His ridiculous route, the unconventional path that had first demonstrated his exceptional understanding of terrain and enemy patterns, had opened doors previously closed to men of his race. In April 1945, as Germany neared defeat, the 3989th was assigned to support operations in Bavaria. Their convoy routes now took them through conquered territory, where the challenges were less about avoiding enemy fire and more about navigating destroyed infrastructure. During one mission, they encountered a column of liberated American prisoners of war walking west along a rural road. Among them was Lieutenant James Reynolds, one of the drivers from their own company, who had gone missing during that fateful mission that had led to the discovery of the destroyed truck. The reunion was emotional. Reynolds had survived the ambush but been captured along with his assistant driver. They had spent 6 months in a German POW camp before being liberated by advancing Allied forces. "We were using the main route just like the orders said," Reynolds told them after his initial medical check. "Walked right into a German patrol. Never had a chance." Jackson nodded grimly. "We found your truck. Used it as evidence to convince the captain we needed better route intelligence." Reynolds looked between Jackson and Whitfield, noting the changed dynamic between them. "Seems like I missed some developments while I was away." "You could say that," Whitfield acknowledged with a faint smile. "Sergeant Jackson here has revolutionized how we plan convoy routes, probably saved half the company from ending up in POW camps with you." As the war in Europe wound down, the 3989th's innovations received formal recognition. Their methods were included in Army transportation doctrine, ensuring they would outlast the conflict. More significantly, their integrated training program became a model for limited cooperation between white and black units, challenging, in a small way, the Army's rigid segregation policies. In May 1945, following Germany's surrender, Captain Whitfield received orders reassigning him to a staff position at Transportation Corps headquarters. Before departing, he called a formation of the entire company. "Men of the 3989th, he began, looking out at the assembled drivers and support personnel. "I've been proud to serve as your commander. Together we've built something special here, not just a trucking company, but a model for what's possible when we recognize each man's potential, regardless of background." He paused, his gaze finding Jackson in the front rank. "When this war began, I had certain assumptions about the capabilities of colored soldiers. Those assumptions were wrong." Murmurs rippled through the formation at this unprecedented acknowledgement. Staff Sergeant Jackson and his intelligence team have demonstrated that excellence knows no color. Their methods have saved countless lives and improved operations throughout the theater. Whitfield continued, "As I depart for my new assignment, I want to express my gratitude for your service and my admiration for your professionalism. The 3989th has set a standard that all units, regardless of composition, should aspire to meet." After the formation dismissed, Whitfield sought out Jackson for a more personal farewell. "I've recommended you for a commission, Jackson," he said without preamble. "The Army needs officers with your abilities." Jackson's expression revealed his surprise. "Sir, you know there are only a handful of colored officers in the entire Army. The chances of approval are better than they were a year ago," Whitfield interrupted. "Things are changing, slowly but surely. Your work has been noticed at the highest levels. It might not happen immediately, but I believe it will happen." "I appreciate your confidence, sir," Jackson replied carefully. "It's not confidence, it's recognition of reality. Men like you are going to help build the post-war Army, whether the old guard is ready for it or not." Whitfield extended his hand. "It's been an honor serving with you, Jackson." "Likewise, sir," Jackson replied, shaking his hand firmly. As the war in Europe ended and units began the process of redeployment, the legacy of the 3989th's innovations continued to spread. Transportation units preparing for the planned invasion of Japan were particularly interested in their methods, recognizing that route intelligence would be crucial in unfamiliar Pacific terrain. For Staff Sergeant Robert Jackson, the war's end brought both pride in what they'd accomplished and uncertainty about the future. The Army that had reluctantly recognized his abilities in wartime might revert to its old patterns in peace, yet he remained optimistic that the changes they'd helped initiate would continue. In July 1945, Jackson received orders to attend Officer Candidate School, the first step toward the commission Captain Whitfield had recommended. The orders came with a personal note from Whitfield. "Your ridiculous route is changing the map. Congratulations." By the time World War II officially ended with Japan's surrender in August 1945, the 3989th Quartermaster Truck Company had established a legacy that extended far beyond its original mission. What began as one driver's alternative route had evolved into a systematic approach to intelligence that saved lives and improved operations throughout the European theater. More significantly, the experience of the 3989th demonstrated the capabilities of African American soldiers when given the opportunity to fully utilize their skills. Their success helped challenge the institutional racism that had limited opportunities for black servicemen, contributing in a small but meaningful way to the changes that would eventually lead to the integration of the U.S. Armed Forces. For Robert Jackson, the journey from overlooked driver to respected intelligence specialist to officer candidate represented both personal achievement and a step toward greater equality. His ridiculous route, born of necessity and careful observation, had opened pathways that would help guide the Army toward a more inclusive future. As the post-war military began the process of demobilization and reorganization, the lessons of the 3989th were preserved in training manuals and operational procedures. The innovations born on the dangerous roads of wartime France continued to influence military transportation doctrine for years to come. In the decades that followed, as the U.S. military gradually moved toward full integration and equal opportunity, the story of the 3989th Quartermaster Truck Company and Staff Sergeant Robert Jackson's revolutionary route intelligence system would be cited as an example of what was possible when talent was recognized regardless of race. The ridiculous route that had once seemed an unnecessary detour had, in fact, been the most direct path to a better future, both for the men whose lives it saved during the war and for the institution it helped to change. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.